Imagine a world where the horizon is not a promise of home, but a gateway to a nightmare. Imagine a sea that does not merely carry you, but actively conspires to swallow you whole. You have spent 10 agonizing years outside the towering walls of Troy. You have seen heroes fall, you have felt the cold bite of bronze, and you have tasted the bitter salt of a decade-long war. You are Odysseus, king of Ithaca, master of the stratagem, the man of many turns. You believe the worst is behind you. You believe that the wind filling your sails is a gift from the gods, guiding you back to the arms of your wife and the soil of your kingdom. But the gods are fickle, and the Mediterranean is not just a body of water. It is a playground for monsters and a graveyard for the proud. Welcome to Chronicle Nexus. Today, we step back into the mists of antiquity to navigate the most legendary voyage ever recorded in human history. This is not just a story of a long trip home. It is a visceral, blood-soaked masterclass in survival. We are diving deep into the Odyssey, focusing on the harrowing encounters with the ancient monsters that turned a few weeks' journey into a 10-year descent into hell. From the psychedelic traps of the Lotus Eaters to the crushing grip of the Cyclops, we will analyze what it truly took to survive the wrath of the supernatural. This is the anatomy of a legend. This is the survival of Odysseus. The journey begins in the shadow of smoke. Troy is a ruin, a smoldering testament to Odysseus's cunning and the Greeks' brutality. As the fleet of 12 ships set sail, the men are intoxicated, not just by wine, but by the euphoria of victory. They are laden with gold, women, and the arrogance that comes from toppling a superpower. But in the world of Homer, pride, hubris, is a death sentence. Odysseus, though brilliant, is a man whose ego is as vast as the sea itself. He does not yet realize that he has offended the very fabric of the divine. The first trial of survival wasn't a monster of flesh and bone, but a monster of the mind. After a fierce storm blown by Zeus himself drove them off course for 9 days, the ships made landfall on the island of the Lotus Eaters. On the surface, this was a paradise, a place of calm winds and sweet air. The inhabitants offered Odysseus's scouts a gift, the lotus fruit. It was honey-sweet, intoxicating, and utterly lethal to the soul. To survive a monster like the lotus, you don't need a sword. You need a memory. Those who ate the fruit lost their nostos, their drive to return home. Their pasts dissolved into a haze of golden apathy. They didn't want to fight, they didn't want to leave, and they didn't even want to live. They simply wanted to exist in the eternal now of the drug. Odysseus, recognizing the psychological erasure taking place, had to drag his weeping men back to the ships by force, chaining them under the rowing benches. It was his first lesson in the survival of a commander. Sometimes the greatest threat to a journey isn't the enemy in front of you, but the comfort that makes you forget why you started. But the psychological peace of the Lotus Eaters was a cruel irony compared to what lay ahead. As they rowed away from the land of forgetfulness, they drifted into the territory of the lawless. They reached the land of the Cyclopes. Imagine a coastline of jagged rock and lush, uncultivated hills, where sheep as large as ponies roam free. There are no councils here, no laws, no agriculture. Only the Cyclopes, giant, one-eyed sons of Poseidon, who live in isolation. Odysseus, driven by a fatal curiosity and a desire for guest gifts, took 12 of his best men and entered a massive cave filled with crates of cheese and pens of lambs. This was the moment where the survival stakes shifted from the abstract to the primal. When the owner of the cave returned, he wasn't a man. He was a mountain of muscle and malice. Polyphemus, he did not greet them with the sacred Greek tradition of hospitality. Instead, he looked at the cowering soldiers, reached out a hand like a crane, and snatched two of them. The description in the ancient text is haunting. He dashed their heads against the stone floor like puppies, their brains splattering the ground. He tore them limb from limb and ate them raw, bones, entrails, and all, washing the gruesome meal down with pails of goat's milk. Odysseus, the man who outsmarted the Trojans, was trapped. A massive boulder, one that 20 teams of oxen could not budge, sealed the cave's mouth. This is where the genius of Odysseus and the core of the Chronicle Nexus ethos shines. To survive Polyphemus, Odysseus couldn't use strength. He was a gnat compared to the giant. He had to use the one thing the monster lacked, the ability to plan 3 steps ahead. First, he played the long game. He didn't kill the giant while he slept, because if he did, the Greeks would be entombed forever behind the boulder. He had to keep the monster alive to open the door. Second, he used the giant's own gluttony against him. Odysseus offered Polyphemus a skin of potent, unmixed wine, the kind that usually required 20 parts water to dilute. The giant, never having tasted the vintage of the gods, guzzled it down, demanding more. "What is your name, stranger?" the giant bellowed in a drunken stupor. Odysseus gave the most famous fake name in history, Autis, no one. As the giant collapsed into a wine-soaked sleep, Odysseus and his remaining men took a massive olive wood stake, sharpened it to a point, and heated it in the fire until it glowed like a dying star. With a collective heave, they drove the burning point directly into the giant's solitary eye. The sound was like a hot blacksmith's iron being plunged into cold water, a hiss of steam, and the sound of boiling blood. The scream of Polyphemus shook the very foundations of the island. His brother Cyclops rushed to the mouth of the cave, shouting through the stone, "Polyphemus, who is hurting you?" And the giant cried out the fatal words, "No one is hurting me. No one is killing me by craft." Thinking their brother was simply mad or afflicted by a god, the other giants left. Odysseus had weaponized language itself to survive. But the physical escape was still to come. As the blinded Polyphemus rolled away the stone the next morning to let his sheep out, he felt the backs of every animal to ensure no Greeks were slipping past. Odysseus, ever the tactician, lashed his men to the bellies of the thick-wooled rams. As the sheep trotted out into the morning light, the monster's hands felt only the soft wool on top, never the desperate men clinging beneath. They reached the ships. They were free. But this is the pivot point of the entire Odyssey. As they rode away, Odysseus's ego flared. He couldn't help himself. He wanted the world and the monster to know who had defeated him. "Cyclops!" he shouted across the water. "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." It was a catastrophic mistake. Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, the god of the seas. The giant lifted a mountain peak and hurled it at the ships, nearly swamping them, and then he raised his hands to the sky and prayed to his father. He asked that Odysseus never reach home, or if he did, that he arrive late, alone, in a stranger's ship, to find his house a wreck. Poseidon heard him. The survival of Odysseus had just moved from a struggle against monsters to a struggle against the very ocean itself. As we continue this journey on Chronicle Nexus, we see that the physical monsters, the giants and the beasts, were only the beginning. The true test of a survivor is not just how you handle the enemy in the cave, but how you handle the consequences of your own pride when the gods themselves turn their eyes toward you. The sails are unfurling again, and the wind is turning cold. Beyond the horizon, More terrors await: the sorceress who turns men into swine, the voices that lure sailors to their doom, and the narrow strait where death wears two faces. The journey is just beginning. Stay with us. As the rocky shores of the Cyclops island fade into a bruised horizon, the salt spray carries with it a heavy, lingering scent, the smell of hubris. Odysseus had won the day, outsmarting a titan of nature. But in his final moment of triumph, he made a fatal error. He shouted his name, he claimed his glory, and in doing so, he gave the blind Polyphemus a target for his father's wrath. Poseidon, the earth-shaker, now knows the name of the man who blinded his son, and the Mediterranean is no longer a path home. It is a sprawling, blue execution chamber. To survive the Odyssey is to understand that the sea does not just contain monsters. The sea itself is a living, breathing adversary. But before the gods unleash their full fury, they offer a moment of false hope. The crew arrives at the floating island of Aeolia, home to Aeolus, the keeper of the winds. Here we see a different kind of survival, not one fought with swords, but one fought with discipline. Aeolus gifts Odysseus a leather bag containing all the storm winds, leaving only the gentle west wind to blow them straight to Ithaca. For 9 days they sail. They are so close that they can see the hearth fires burning on the shores of their homeland. But exhaustion is a predator of its own. As Odysseus finally succumbs to sleep, his men, driven by the monster of suspicion and greed, believe the bag contains gold. They tear it open. In an instant, the bottled tempests explode with primordial rage, dragging them back across the wine-dark sea, away from everything they love. The lesson here is brutal. Survival is a collective effort, and the weakness of a single comrade can undo a decade of struggle. Driven back to the unknown, the fleet encounters the Laestrygonians. If Polyphemus was a solitary nightmare, the Laestrygonians are a systemic catastrophe. These are not mere giants. They are a civilization of cannibals. In the narrow, cliff-walled harbor of Telepolos, the Greeks find themselves trapped in a geographic kill zone. The giants do not engage in honorable combat. They pelt the ships with boulders the size of houses, shattering wood and bone with industrialized efficiency. They spear the drowning sailors like fish and carry them off for dinner. Of the 12 ships that left Troy, only one remains, Odysseus' own. The survival stakes have shifted from bringing the men home to escaping with your life. This brings the lone survivors to the island of Aea, the domain of Circe. Here, the monster takes a seductive, cerebral form. Circe, the daughter of the sun, does not use brute force. She uses hospitality as a weapon. When Odysseus's scouts enter her stone palace, they find a woman weaving at a loom, singing with a voice that sounds like liquid gold. She offers them wine and honey, but the meal is laced with drugs. With a flick of her wand, their human forms melt away, their skin thickens into bristles, and their cries turn into the grunts of swine. Surviving Circe requires more than a sharp blade. It requires divine intervention and a cold, calculating mind. Hermes, the messenger god, meets Odysseus in the woods and provides him with moly, a mythical herb with a black root and a milky flower that renders him immune to Circe's sorcery. When Odysseus confronts her, he does not just survive, he dominates. He draws his sword at the moment of her spell's failure, forcing the goddess to her knees. This is a pivotal moment in the survival manual of the ancients. Sometimes, to survive a monster, you must prove you are more dangerous than they are. Odysseus remains on her island for a year, learning the secrets of the underworld and the maps of the stars, transforming a prison into a sanctuary of forbidden knowledge. But the most famous trials are yet to come, and Circe's parting gift is a warning of the horrors that guard the path home. First come the Sirens. These are not the beautiful mermaids of modern folklore. They are avian-human hybrids, creatures of the air and the bone-strewn shore. Their power is not physical, it is psychological. They sing a song that promises total knowledge. They sing to you about your own life, your own pain, and the secrets of the universe. No man can resist it. To survive the Sirens, Odysseus employs a masterclass in risk management. He plugs his men's ears with softened beeswax, rendering them deaf to the temptation. But for himself, he craves the experience without the fatality. He commands his men to bind him to the mast, tighter and tighter, with orders to ignore his screams for release. As the song hits his ears, Odysseus, the wisest of men, begs to be let go. He would have thrown himself into the surf to die, just to hear one more note. He survives not through his own strength, but by acknowledging his own weakness and building a system to counteract it. It is a profound meditation on the human condition. We are all susceptible to the song, and our only defense is the mast we choose to bind ourselves to. The final hurdle of this middle journey is perhaps the most terrifying choice any leader has ever had to make: the Strait of Scylla and Charybdis. It is the literal definition of between a rock and a hard place. On one side lies Charybdis, a gargantuan whirlpool that swallows the sea 3 times a day and vomits it back up. To sail too close to her is to lose the ship, the crew, and the mission entirely. On the other side sits Scylla, a nightmare of biological horror. She is a multi-headed beast dwelling in a high mountain cave. Each of her 6 long necks ends in a head with triple rows of fangs. She is a predator that demands a toll. Odysseus knows that to avoid the total destruction of Charybdis, he must sail closer to Scylla. He knows that 6 of his men will die. He can even see which ones will likely be grabbed, but he tells them nothing. He puts on his armor, despite Circe's warning that armor is useless against a phantom, and watches in horror as the 6 long necks snake down from the cliffs. The men are snatched up, crying out his name one last time as they are pulled into the heights to be devoured. This is the darkest part of the survival journey. It isn't about the clever trick or the divine herb. It is about the cold, mathematical reality of sacrifice. To save the ship, Odysseus has to feed the beast. He survives, but at the cost of his soul's peace. As they row away from the screaming shadows of the cliffs, the crew is broken, the leader is haunted, and the sun begins to set on the most treacherous stretch of water in human mythology. But the gods are not finished. Ahead lies the island of the sun and a final test of hunger and piety. That will determine if anyone, besides Odysseus himself, will ever see the craggy hills of Ithaca again. The monsters of the flesh have been passed, but the monsters of the spirit are waiting. Stay tuned for the final descent into darkness. The golden haze of the horizon breaks not with the promise of home, but with the shimmering emerald peaks of Thrinakia, the island of the sun. To any other sailor, this would look like paradise. To Odysseus, it looks like a graveyard. He remembers the chilling prophecies of both the blind seer Tiresias and the sorceress Circe. Avoid the island of the sun god, for there dwells the undoing of your soul. But Odysseus is no longer leading a fleet of legendary warriors. He is leading a hollowed-out shell of a crew, men whose spirits were devoured by the Cyclops and whose courage was dissolved in the digestive fires of Scylla. As the keel of the ship scrapes the sand, the air is thick with the scent of wild thyme and the low melodic lowing of cattle. These are no ordinary beasts. These are the kine of Helios, the sun, who sees all and hears all. They are immortal, beautiful and strictly forbidden. Odysseus, desperate and prophetic, demands a holy oath from his men. Touch not the cattle, for they belong to a god who burns with an unquenchable fire. The men, weeping with relief to be on solid ground, swear the oath. But the gods, as they often do in the world of the Odyssey, have a cruel sense of irony. For an entire month, the south wind blows with a relentless fury, pinning the ship to the shore. Their provisions, the grain and red wine of Circe, vanish. Hunger, the most primal and insidious of monsters, begins to gnaw at their vitals. This is the transition from the monsters of the flesh to the monsters of the spirit. Hunger is not a beast you can stab in the eye. It is a slow-burning rot that dissolves morality. Odysseus, perhaps seeking a moment of divine clarity or simply a reprieve from the sight of his starving men, retreats into the interior of the island to pray. But the gods wrap his mind in a heavy sleep, leaving the crew leaderless and vulnerable to the whispers of Eurylochus. Eurylochus is the voice of pragmatic rebellion. He argues that dying of hunger is the most pitiable of deaths, a slow fading into nothingness. He proposes a sacrilegious bargain. They will kill the cattle, feast now, and promise to build a magnificent temple to Helios once they return to Ithaca. It is the classic human delusion, the idea that we can negotiate with the divine to justify our immediate desires. As Odysseus wakes and smells the roasting fat, he knows the world has ended. The meat on the spits begins to low, and the flayed hides crawl across the sand like living shadows, a grotesque, supernatural sign that the price for this meal will be paid in blood. When the winds finally die down, the crew set sail, bloated with stolen divinity and a false sense of security. But as soon as the island of Thrinacia slips beneath the horizon, the sky turns the color of a bruised plum. Zeus, pressured by a vengeful Helios who threatened to hide the sun in the underworld forever, finally strikes. A thunderbolt, forged in the heart of Olympus, shatters the mast. The ship, the last vessel of a once mighty fleet, disintegrates like wet parchment. The men are tossed into the churning, salt-white foam. They bob like petrels in the waves, their cries silenced by the roar of the gale. Until one by one they slip beneath the surface. Every man who ate the sun's cattle is claimed by the sea. Odysseus alone remains. He is stripped of his ship, his crew, and his pride. He is a man reduced to a single piece of timber, the keel of his broken vessel, lashed together with a backstay of oxhide. The current, as if driven by a sentient malice, carries him back toward the very horror he thought he had escaped. Charybdis. The imagery here is some of the most harrowing in the entire poem. As the giant whirlpool begins to swallow the sea, Odysseus is pulled into the vortex. Just as his makeshift raft is sucked into the abyss, he leaps upward, grabbing onto the branches of a great fig tree that overhangs the churning pit. He hangs there like a bat, his toes dangling over the maw of a monster that swallows the ocean 3 times a day. He must wait, suspended between life and a watery death, for hours until Charybdis vomits back the mast. It is a test of pure endurance, a moment where the hero is literally hanging by a thread of nature, waiting for the sea to give back what it took. When the timber finally resurfaces, he drops, paddles with his bare hands, and escapes the reach of the whirlpool. For 9 days he drifts. The sun blisters his skin, and the salt crystals form a white crust over his eyes. He is no longer a king of Ithaca. He is a piece of driftwood. On the 10th day, he washes ashore on Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso. If Scylla was a monster of teeth, and Charybdis a monster of the abyss, Calypso represents the monster of stagnation. She is beautiful, divine, and she offers Odysseus something no other monster could: immortality. But this immortality comes at the cost of his identity. For 7 years, Odysseus is held captive in a paradise that feels like a tomb. He spends his days sitting on the rocky shore, weeping, his eyes fixed on the horizon where Ithaca should be. The tragedy of Ogygia is the tragedy of a man who has everything a human could want: eternal youth, the love of a goddess, and a world without pain, and finds it utterly worthless because it is not his life. It is the ultimate psychological trial. The hero must choose between being a god in a cage or a mortal man with a home. During these 7 years, the narrative depth of the Odyssey shifts. We see the toll that surviving monsters takes on a human soul. Odysseus is suffering from what we might today call post-traumatic stress. He has seen his friends eaten alive, his fleet burned, and his world shattered. The monsters have not just been obstacles, they have been erasers of his humanity. Finally, the gods intervene. Athena, his eternal patron, convinces Zeus that Odysseus has suffered enough. Hermes, the messenger god, is sent to Ogygia to command Calypso to let him go. The scene is poignant. Calypso rails against the double standards of the gods, who take mortal lovers but forbid goddesses the same, yet she ultimately submits. She gives Odysseus the tools to build a raft, and for the first time in nearly a decade, the hero takes his fate into his own hands. He sails for 17 days, guided by the stars, only to be spotted by Poseidon, who is returning from a feast in Ethiopia. The earth-shaker's rage is renewed. He stirs the sea with his trident, summoning a storm that dwarfs anything Odysseus has seen before. The raft is shattered, and Odysseus is plunged into the depths, weighed down by the heavy robes Calypso gave him, a final, literal weight of his past. He is saved by the sea nymph Leucothea, who gives him a magic veil of protection, but the survival is brutal. He is battered against the jagged reefs of the island of Sharia, his skin stripped from his hands as he clings to the rocks, mirroring the way a squid clings to its prey. When he finally staggers onto the shore of the Phaeacians, he is naked, caked in brine, and so exhausted that he buries himself in a bed of fallen leaves like a dying ember. This is the end of the middle journey. He has survived the physical monsters of the ocean and the existential monsters of the spirit. He has lost everything: his men, his ships, and 7 years of his life. But as he lies beneath the leaves on the shores of Sharia, he is no longer just a survivor. He is a man who has looked into the mouth of every horror the ancient world could conjure and refused to blink. But the greatest monster of all is still waiting for him. It isn't a 6-headed beast or a divine whirlpool. It is the monster that has taken root in his own home, the suitors who have turned his palace into a den of vultures. The descent into darkness is nearly over, but the final battle for Ithaca and for the soul of Odysseus is only just beginning. Stay tuned for the final reckoning. The transition from the world of gods and monsters to the shores of Ithaca is not a joyful homecoming, but a shift into a different kind of nightmare. When Odysseus finally wakes on the rocky coast of his kingdom, he does not recognize it. Wrapped in a supernatural mist by Athena, the landscape of his youth is distorted, a mirror of his own fractured identity. For 20 years, he has been a wanderer, a captive, a soldier, and a survivor. Now, he must become a ghost in his own house. This is where the survival narrative shifts from the physical to the psychological. To survive the monsters of Ithaca, Odysseus cannot charge in with a drawn sword and a war cry. He must embrace the ultimate humiliation. He must become the beggar. The transformation into a beggar is perhaps Odysseus's most profound act of endurance. Athena withers his skin, dims the fire in his eyes, and drapes him in rags that smell of smoke and poverty. This is not merely a tactical disguise, it is a spiritual trial. For a king who prided himself on his lineage and his kleos, to be struck, insulted, and spat upon by the very men who are eating his cattle and wooing his wife is a test of restraint that rivals the song of the Sirens. He must sit at the edge of his own hall, watching the suitors, led by the arrogant Antinous and the manipulative Eurymachus, violate every sacred law of Xenia, or divine hospitality. These men are the new monsters. They do not have 6 heads or the strength to move boulders, but they possess a moral rot that is far more dangerous to the fabric of civilization. They are parasites, a multi-headed beast of greed that has spent a decade slowly devouring the legacy of the House of Laertes. As Odysseus navigates his palace in shadow, he encounters the few remaining sparks of loyalty that have survived the darkness. There is Eumaeus, the humble swineherd, whose unwavering devotion to a master he believes is dead serves as a moral compass for the entire epic. In Eumaeus's hut, we see a different side of survival, the survival of the heart. While the suitors have allowed their humanity to be eroded by luxury and power, the swineherd has kept the flame of decency alive in the face of despair. This is where Odysseus reunites with his son, Telemachus. The scene is not one of simple celebration, but of a heavy, somber realization. Telemachus has grown up under the shadow of vultures, a prince without a protector. When Odysseus reveals himself, it is a moment of raw, primal connection, a father and son forming a pact of blood to reclaim a stolen world. But the most agonizing part of this homecoming is the presence of Penelope. For 20 years, she has been the anchor of his soul, the reason he rejected the immortality offered by Calypso. Now he sits just feet away from her, hidden behind the mask of a vagabond, listening to her weep for her lost husband. This is a psychological torture deeper than any physical wound inflicted by a Ciconian spear. Penelope is his intellectual equal, a woman who has survived her own war of wits against the suitors for 20 years. Her shroud of Laertes trick, weaving by day and unweaving by night, was her own version of the Trojan horse. To survive Ithaca, Odysseus must wait. He must endure the sight of his wife's grief until the moment is perfect, proving that his greatest weapon was never his strength, but his patience. The tension reaches a breaking point with the trial of the bow. This is the moment where the mythical and the domestic collide. Penelope, perhaps sensing something familiar in the beggar's eyes, or perhaps simply driven to the end of her endurance, announces that she will marry whoever can string the great bow of Odysseus and shoot an arrow through the rings of 12 axe heads. This bow is an ancient relic, a gift from Iphitus, and it represents the weight of the kingship itself. One by one, the suitors try and fail. They are soft men, products of a decadence that has made them weak. They have the appetite of monsters, but none of the substance. They cannot even bend the wood, let alone string it. When the beggar steps forward, the hall falls into a mocking silence. The suitors sneer at the idea of a vagrant touching the weapon of a king. But as Odysseus takes the bow, the atmosphere shifts. The poem describes him handling the bow like a musician handling a lyre, checking for rot, feeling the tension of the wood. When he finally strings it, the sound of the bowstring is compared to the swallow's note, a high, thin, terrifying sound that signals the end of an era. Zeus thunders above, a divine seal of approval for the carnage that is about to follow. The massacre in the hall is the final monster slaying of the Odyssey. It is visceral, brutal, and systematic. When Odysseus sheds his rags and leaps to the stone threshold, he is no longer the weary traveler. He is the avatar of divine justice. The first arrow finds the throat of Antinous, the lead suitor, who dies with a cup of wine at his lips, his lifeblood mixing with the stolen vintage of the king. This is a purification by blood. The suitors, trapped in the hall like cattle in a pen, realize too late that the beggar they tormented is the very man they tried to erase. Odysseus, Telemachus, and the loyal servants Eumaeus and Philoetius stand against 100 men, but the odds do not matter. Odysseus is a man who survived the underworld. He is a man who outlived the anger of Poseidon. The suitors are merely hollow men, and in the face of a true hero, they crumble. Athena's Aegis shield eventually appears in the air, a terrifying vision that breaks the suitor's will, turning the battle into a slaughter. By the end of the night, the hall is a charnel house. The vultures have been purged. Yet, even after the blood is washed from the floors, the final survival test remains: the recognition of Penelope. She is the only person Odysseus cannot conquer with force or deceive with a story. She tests him one last time, asking a servant to move their marriage bed. Odysseus, for the first and only time, loses his cool, explaining that the bed cannot be moved because he built it himself from the living trunk of an olive tree that remains rooted in the earth. This is the final secret, the shibboleth of their union. The bed, rooted in the soil of Ithaca, symbolizes the permanence of their love and the end of his wandering. Odysseus has survived the monsters of the sea and the monsters of the soul. He has traveled to the edge of the world and back, losing everything except his identity. As he finally embraces Penelope, the narrative loop closes. He is no longer no one. He is Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca. He has survived the ancient world, not by becoming a god, but by remaining a man of twists and turns, a man of sorrow, and ultimately, a man who found his way home. The Odyssey is over, but the legend of the man who looked into the abyss and survived remains etched in the stars forever. But the end of the journey is not merely the end of the distance traveled, it is the beginning of a profound transformation. To understand why the Odyssey survives, we must look beyond the blood-soaked floors of the hall in Ithaca and into the very soul of the man who stood there. Odysseus did not just survive monsters, he survived the slow erosion of his own humanity. The monsters he faced were never just beasts of scale and tooth. They were personifications of the primordial chaos that exists on the fringes of civilization. Polyphemus represented the rejection of law and hospitality, the brute force of nature that consumes without reason. The Sirens were the fatal lure of a past that refuses to stay dead, a song of total knowledge that leads only to a graveyard of bleached bones. Circe was the danger of losing one's spirit to base desires, turning men into the swine they acted like. In every encounter, Odysseus was tempted to abandon his path, to cease his striving, and to melt into the landscape of the monstrous. Yet he remained Polytropos, the man of many ways, the man of twists and turns. This epithet is the key to his survival. Unlike Achilles, who sought a brief, glorious life through raw violence, Odysseus sought the long game. He understood that survival is an act of creativity. When he told the Cyclops his name was no one, he wasn't just being clever, he was performing a metaphysical operation. He was sacrificing his ego to save his life. He was proving that the mind is the ultimate weapon against the mindless. This is the first great lesson of the Odyssey, that intelligence, paired with an iron will, can navigate the impossible. However, we must also acknowledge the cost of this survival. The Odyssey is a tragedy disguised as a victory. Every time Odysseus triumphed, he paid in the lives of his men. He returned to Ithaca alone. He carries the weight of 12 ships lost to the winds and the waves. The hero we celebrate is a man haunted by the ghosts of those who didn't possess his cunning. This adds a layer of grit to the ancient epic that resonates even more deeply today. It reminds us that surviving the ancient monsters of our own lives, our traumas, our failures, our losses, leaves scars. Odysseus is the patron saint of the survivor, the one who makes it back but is forever changed by the darkness he had to walk through. As the dust settles on the fields of Ithaca, we see that the Odyssey is ultimately a story about Nostos, the homecoming. In the Greek world, Kleos, glory, was the highest prize, usually won on the battlefield. But Odysseus redefines what it means to be glorious. He rejects the immortality offered by the goddess Calypso. He rejects a life of eternal ease and divine beauty because it would mean the end of his story. He chooses mortality. He chooses the wrinkles on Penelope's face and the rocky, hard soil of Ithaca over the golden halls of the gods. In doing so, he elevates the human experience above the divine. He tells the universe that to be human, to suffer, to age, to struggle, and to love is more meaningful than to exist forever in a state of static perfection. This choice is what bridges the gap between the Bronze Age and the modern era. We may not fear Scylla or Charybdis in the literal sense, but we navigate the monsters of modern existence every day. The crushing weight of depression, the sirens of digital distraction, the cyclopean brutality of a world that often feels indifferent to our survival. Like Odysseus, we are all travelers in a world that is often larger and more terrifying than we are. And like him, we must find our way back to our own Ithaca, that place of belonging, purpose, and truth. The literary legacy of this journey is immeasurable. Without the Odyssey, there is no Aeneid. There is no Dante's Inferno. There is no James Joyce. The very structure of the hero's journey that dominates our cinema and our novels today was etched into the human consciousness by Homer. We keep returning to this story because it is the blueprint of the human soul's endurance. It tells us that no matter how far we are blown off course, no matter how many gods or monsters stand in our way, the path home is always there, waiting to be found by the one who refuses to give up. Odysseus is the bridge between the world of myth and the world of man. He is the first modern character, a man who doubts, a man who weeps, a man who lies, but a man who ultimately endures. His survival is not a gift from the heavens. It is a hard-won victory of the human spirit. As he sits in his palace, finally at peace, the echoes of the wine-dark sea fade into the background. But the lesson remains. To survive the monster, you must be more than a warrior. You must be a thinker, a dreamer, and a survivor. The Odyssey is the eternal song of the wanderer. It is a reminder that we are all, in some way, lost at sea. We are all searching for the shore, and while the monsters may be ancient, the courage required to face them is renewed in every generation that dares to set sail into the unknown. The journey of Odysseus didn't end 3,000 years ago. It continues every time a person chooses to keep going when all hope seems lost. Thank you for journeying with us through the mist and the myth. We have navigated the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean, faced the wrath of Poseidon, and witnessed the homecoming of history's greatest survivor. The legend of Odysseus serves as a testament to the fact that while monsters may be immortal, the human will to return home is even more enduring. If you found value in this deep dive into the heart of ancient mythology, make sure to anchor yourself here with us. The world of history and myth is vast, and there are many more legends waiting to be unearthed. Support the journey by liking this video and subscribing to Chronicle Nexus. By joining our community, you ensure that these timeless stories continue to be told for generations to come. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which of Odysseus's trials do you think was the most difficult? Or which monster from the Odyssey fascinates you the most? We read every comment and love hearing your perspectives. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an expedition into the past. This has been Chronicle Nexus, where the past isn't just a memory, it's an epic waiting to be rediscovered. Until the next voyage, keep seeking, keep surviving, and keep exploring the echoes of the ages. Farewell, travelers.